Hey, 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 and welcome to the lecture on the digestive system. This lecture is designed to help you with Anatomy 202. Let's go ahead and dive in. You are going to love the digestive system because it's so interesting. You love to eat, if you're like me, and then it's nice to push it on out so that you can eat some more. So you're going to love the digestive system, I think. Lots of parts, so stay focused. And I would probably take several breaks throughout the video just because it's a lot, but it's good. Okay. Digestion. That's going to be the chemical and mechanical breakdown of foods. And so it basically, if I was to sum this up, I'd say it's how you break down your food, let's say the pizza you ate for lunch, and then how you build up the things that you need. And so what are the things that we need? We need proteins to be made. We need DNA to be made. So we need new cells, right? We have to make DNA to make new cells. So it's the breakdown of the food that we eat so that we can build up. And so it is the mechanical breakdown. It says mechanical digestion. That's going to be like the chewing, the squishing, the the mashing. That's kind of gross. Anyway, the chemical breakdown, and that's going to be lots of enzymes that we're going to talk about in this lecture. So, breaks down food particles by changing them into smaller forms. Now, write this in for me. There is two forms of metabolism. So, metabolism has two forms. The first one is catabolism. And that's going to be the breakdown. And then anabolism is going to be the build up. So the building of new cells. So highlight both of those. They're both on the test. Okay, digestive system, it says organs of the digestive system carry out mechanical and chemical digestion as well as ingestion, bringing it in, propulsion, pushing it through, absorption, we got to get the food from the small intestines into the bloodstream. Yes, everything you eat is absorbed into the bloodstream. So be cautious about what you eat. Everything you eat goes into the blood, which goes everywhere in your body. And then defecation, which will be the removal. The digestive system consists of this alimentary canal and some extra organs. And so let me show you that here. Okay, so the alimentary canal is where the food actually goes through. It says consists of organs that extend from the mouth to the anus that food go through. Okay, so let's draw that out, and I'll draw, this blue should be fun. So from the mouth down the esophagus, okay, and then it goes to the stomach. So that's where the stomach is. Now from the stomach, it's going to go behind the large intestines and into the small intestines. This is the pathway of food. From the small intestines, it goes to the large intestines, up, over, down, out. And so that would be your alimentary canal. Let me do that one more time for you. Mouth, esophagus, stomach, and then it goes small intestines, all foldy, 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 and then it goes large intestines and excreted. And so that would be the alimentary canal. The accessory organs, so the organs I didn't mention that food doesn't go through, but I mean we can't live without them, they really help. The first one is going to be the liver. Make that a little thinner. Okay, so you got the first one is the liver, and then underneath that you'll see the gallbladder. They're helpers. That food doesn't travel through the liver, but really helps with digestion. Okay, behind the stomach is the spleen, but it doesn't really have anything to do with that. So we got liver, gallbladder. Oh, the pancreas. The pancreas is back here hiding. You just can't see it. So I'll draw it in there. So liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Those are all helpers. Food also doesn't go through the appendix, which is not labeled or listed. And so those would be accessory organs. the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas are the main ones, consist of organs that empty secretions into the alimentary canal, but food doesn't pass through them. Alright, and this is a picture of the canal, just kind of showing the distance, so I thought that was super interesting, so I left it. You can see it starts with the mouth, that's the tongue. Esophagus, stomach, there you can see where the gallbladder and pancreas help. Small intestines, large intestines, anus. And so one thing I want to point out that I found interesting when I first started studying the digestive system, the small intestines is longer than the large intestines. So this is the small, this is the large. So why are they named small intestines if this one is longer? Well, they're named from their diameter. So this is long and skinny, while the large intestines is shorter but thicker. So their diameter is how they're named. Anyway. Okay, the structure of this alimentary canal. First, let me point out, you probably remember from 201, the abdominal cavity has the peritoneum in it, right? That's the lining of the abdominal cavity. And so, just pointing that out. But then, the wall has these 4 layers. Mucus layer, or the mucosa layer, which has mucus release, so it says innermost layer, mucous membrane, and it tells you in the table up above what types of cells are there. Submucosa, that's going to be just below it. We've got a picture coming up. The thing you want to know for sure about the submucosa layer, and I'm going to highlight it, it has blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. So blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, it's got that connective tissue. So that's the only one that's got nerves that's included. Okay, muscularis, that's going to be the muscles. It's a smooth muscle. You could have probably figured that one out. But that's what causes the movement. The pushing and the movement. That's the cells. And then serosa, epithelial connective tissue, that's going to be the protective lubrication. So make sure you got this one highlighted and know that it's got the blood vessels, nerves, and connective tissues. Okay, so here's a picture. You can kind of pick them out there. Okay, there is the mucosa. There is the submucosa. Okay, there's the muscularis, so the muscle down below. And the serosa. So that's the 4 layers. But I want to point out that how it's got those little finger-like projections on the top. Those are the villi. They're little hairs, and we'll talk more about them when we get to the small intestine. But they're little hairs that wiggle, and they help with absorption. Neatest things ever. And then you'll also see the lacteals you remember from the lymphatic system here. Those they absorb the fat. So remember that the lymphatic system helped absorb fat. So that's where the lacteals are. They're up in those villi, which is really interesting. Anyway, okay, moving on. And you know that the goblet cells on the bottom, they secrete mucus. I'm sure you remember that from 201. Okay, how does this whole thing go about? How does the food move through? Well, there's 2 different movements. There's this mixing movement, like a shake and bake movement. And so this chyme, that's this watery substance from the stomach, and that's the yellow that's pictured here. It's like a watery substance it starts in the stomach and empties into the small intestines, and that's like a shake movement. I'm moving my hands, but you can't see them. Okay, then there's a propelling movement, which would be like a squishing forward. And that squishing forward is called peristalsis. It's like, you know how when you're almost out of toothpaste? Everybody does it. I know, quit playing like you always have toothpaste. But you're almost out, and so you take the bottom of the toothpaste and you squish it up. Okay, that's what peristalsis reminds me of. It's the ring-like contraction as it progresses, it propels, it pushes. So peristalsis, you'll see that movement in the esophagus and throughout the small and large intestines. The mixing movement, you'll see that in the stomach. As far as how does the food get into this nice organized ball right there. You don't realize that you do it, but when you chew your food, you make a ball of food, and that ball is called a bolus. It's like you swallow it all in chunks, or all in balls, called a bolus. Anyway, so the bolus is like chewed food from the mouth to the stomach. It's like a ball. Anyway. Okay, so you want to highlight a bunch on this slide. So go ahead and highlight this. Submucosal plexus, that is going to be what controls the secretion. Plexus, like nerves. Myenteric plexus controls gastrointestinal motility, so the movement. So submucosal plexus controls the secretion. Myenteric plexus controls the gastrointestinal motility. And this is all nervous system. Okay, and then also go ahead and highlight the parasympathetic impulse increases activity of digestive system. So that's the part of the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, that's going to speed up digestion, increase digestion. The sympathetic impulse slows down, inhibits. And so they kind of work together for homeostasis, right? But during stressful times of your life, you may have a slowed down digestion. And that's why that's why we eat more also. But the sympathetic impulse may increase the storage of food because you're not digesting it as fast when you're stressed out. But this is just the nerves of the digestive system. And you'll see, you can kind of see, go back to this first picture right here. You can actually see the nerve plexus right there. Anywho, moving on to the mouth, this is where digestion starts. And it starts mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. So in the mouth, you start to chew, nom 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 nom, chew your food up. That'd be the mechanical digestion. And then the chemical digestion is going to be the saliva that has all those enzymes. But I did want to point out mastification is chewing. And I'm sure you remember from 201 the muscles that deal with mastification. But so it all starts right here in the mouth. I just left this in here because I thought it was neat. Teeth are the hardest structures in the body. I wonder why we break them so often. Because we don't take care of them, right? We chew things that are too hard, that we shouldn't, or chewy. There's 20 of them that fall out, deciduous. And there's 32 permanent teeth. Some of which we have removed, though. Okay, this is just the structure of a tooth. This is just interesting. You'll see right here the pulp. That's the nerve and the blood that lies within. And the enamel on the outside, you have 2 layers of enamel. And the outer layer you can fix. So if you take care of your teeth and brush them right, even though there might be a tiny little hole in the outer layer, it can be fixed. But if it ever goes down into the second layer of enamel, it can't ever be fixed. Okay, and then you'll see the root right here, the root canal. They actually remove the root, but it's infected. It's rotting. The root is dying. So one of those. But they'll remove it. And the reason it still hurts is because the tissue around it is still living. Okay. Saliva. Salivary glands make saliva. Not so hard, huh? You can remember that. So you got 3 that we're going to look at. So 3 different salivary glands that make saliva. And what does it do? It moistens the food. Helps you make that bolus, that ball. Saliva contains enzymes which are going to start the chemical digestion of carbohydrates in the mouth. So we're breaking down food right off the bat. And bicarbonate ions to make the pH. Okay, the word from now on, anytime you see bicarbonate ions, I want you to think regulates the pH, because it's going to be in the digestive system several times, and it was in the blood too. But it regulates the pH. So the bicarbonate help keep the pH favorable, so it protects your teeth. So if you eat something acidic, the saliva will protect your teeth. Okay, 3 different glands that we're going to look at, 3 different salivary glands. And you want to know the location of these for the lab exam, the final lab exam. The parotid is right in front of the ear. Submandibular, sub below the mandible. So submandibular, you'll see that one in the picture. And then sublingual, sub below lingual, tongue or speech. So all 3 of those there. And go ahead and highlight the function of the saliva. Okay, so our 3 glands in more detail. The first one, the parotid, you want to highlight all 3 of these. You may see them on the test. Largest in the body, in front of the ear. Saliva contains amylase, so that's going to be the big thing. Amylase, that's the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. Now, let me point this out. Anytime you see a word that ends in ASE, that means that that word is an enzyme. And an enzyme is a protein that has a specific job. It breaks down or builds up, or it does some work. So they're the workers. But now, of course, all enzymes don't end in the word ASE. That would be nice, but they don't. So anytime you see ASE, it means enzyme. So amylase is the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. Specifically, amylose is one of the carbohydrates. Anytime you see OSE, that means sugar, right? Like glucose or amylose, whatever. But the table over here on the right hand side tells where it is and the type of secretion, but it's got in it amylase. Okay, submandibular, we said below the mandible. That's where it is. It's got some serous fluid, that's just watery, liquidy fluid with mucus in it. And it's in the floor of the mouth, so below the mandible. Sublingual is going to be below the tongue, mainly mucus, and it's going to be right in. It is thick. It's the thickest one. And there they are. You can see all 3 of them in the picture. Parotid, submandibular, and sublingual. Okay, and this you just think is interesting. The tongue, it pushes the food into the pharynx. So this is the pharynx right here. This whole little tunnel. So food pushes back into the pharynx. I don't see that labeled anywhere. And then, so does the nose, right? That's how you breathe it in, and that's not pushes food, but pushes air down. And then in the front here, we're going to see the trachea, but then in the back, you'll see the esophagus from the pharynx. So, and here, this picture on the bottom right shows that bowl is pushing down the esophagus. Okay, esophagus. Muscular too. We already talked about how it does peristalsis, right? The squishing of your toothpaste. Penetrates the diaphragm through the esophageal hiatus, so that's an opening containing mucus, so it's slimy so that the food can slither down. Isn't that gross? Okay, and then at the bottom of the esophagus, there's an opening or a sphincter. A sphincter is a muscle that's round that can open and close. And so lower esophageal or cardiac sphincter. It's going to be on the lab test, and either answer is correct. Like lower esophageal sphincter or cardiac sphincter. But it's right here. Let's see if I can. So right here where the stomach, so where the esophagus and the stomach go together. And that's going to open to let food into the stomach and then close to keep the food in the stomach. Now, highlight this hernia. You've probably heard of it before. Hiatal hernia, portion of the stomach, so the stomach protrudes up through weakened esophageal hiatus and into the thorax. So it goes back into the esophagus. The reflux, heartburn, difficulty swallowing, ulcers, because of gastric juices in the esophagus. So, a little hernia that hurts. Okay, stomach is a J-shaped organ, and books always say that, but I don't really see it. I guess kind of J-shaped. Pouch-like organ. It's inferior or behind the diaphragm. Okay, it's got these wrinkles called rugae. So the inner lining, the folds on the inside, are rugae of mucus, mucosa, and submucosa that allow distension. But this lining is very important. That's why I've highlighted it here. What it does is it protects it. The stomach has acids in it that we're about to look at, and that lining protects the stomach from being injured by its own acids. And so it's like a mucousy layer, like an oily layer. It's all folded up. And it's important. The small intestines and large intestines don't have that lining. So oftentimes, there'll be more ulcers or whatnot in there. But if there's a ulcer in the stomach, there's a tear in that lining that burns because the acids get into the stomach. And that's what the stomach does. It takes the food from the esophagus, shake, 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 mixes, initiates protein digestion. Not very much is absorbed from the stomach. So you don't take a lot of, some is, and we'll look at what is, but not very much is absorbed into the blood from the stomach. And then it moves food from the esophagus to the small intestines. Okay, you want to know all of this for lab, so let's go ahead and point it out. I'm sure I'll point it out again. But, okay, so we've got the first part right here is going to be the lower esophageal or cardiac sphincter. Right, so that's that opening. Okay, then up here, this we call the fundic region or the fundus. Okay, right here, this whole part right here, we would call the body. Okay, pyloric region is at the bottom. And then this opening is the pyloric sphincter. So you got two sphincters, cardiac sphincter and pyloric sphincter. And then the regions would be fundic region, body, pyloric region. Okay, looking at the picture, you can also see the folds inside. See how it's like wrinkly? Name the membrane folds. That would be the rugae. Is that labeled anywhere? Doesn't look like it. But that's all on the inside of the stomach. This is just a picture of an x-ray of the stomach, so I thought that was interesting, so I left it. Okay, what does the stomach secrete? The stomach secretes, they're gastric secretions, and that's here's what they are. Okay, pepsinogen. Anytime you see I-N-O-G-E-N or O-G-E-N at the end of a word, that means the inactive form of it. So pepsinogen is going to become pepsin, okay, from the chief cells. Gastric lipase, remember I said anything that ends in ASE is an enzyme, and that makes you think about lipid, right? Lipid lipase. So this is the fat splitting enzyme. So that's what breaks down fat. So it's the enzyme that helps break down fat. Hydrochloric acid, that's going to help break down the food. Acid, low pH, right? So low pH produced by the parietal cells. Mucus, secreted by mucus cells, and it just provides a lubrication so that it can slither on through, protects the lining. And then the intrinsic factor produced by the parietal cells, and that's required for B12, vitamin B12. You get vitamin B12 from red meats, and so it helps to absorb. You actually absorb the B12. So, okay, let me take a second and draw this out on a whiteboard. Okay, so you make a table like me too. Okay, so the first one listed is the secretion is pepsinogen, and it comes from the chief cells. And remember, it's the inactive form of pepsin, so we're going to just go ahead and put that out right there. So pepsinogen becomes pepsin. And it helps to break down proteins. So your notes say active enzyme that breaks down proteins into polypeptides, which is smaller proteins, forms from pepsinogen in the presence of when there's hydrochloric acid. So we're going to get over that. We're going to go over that one. Okay, the next one is gastric lipase, and it also comes from those cells. We call it gastric lipase because there's some other lipase that we're going to look at from other places. And what is the purpose? It's a fat splitting. So fat breakdown. Okay, the next one is going to be your hydrochloric acid. Remember, that's going to be very acidic. So hydrochloric acid has a pH some 1.7 to 2, so very, very low on the scale. It's produced by parietal cells. I'm going to ask you that on the test. Make sure you know that hydrochloric acid comes from the parietal cells, and that's what converts the pepsinogen to the pepsin. The last one, no, not the last one. Okay, you got mucus. Secreted by the mucosal cells. So protection of the stomach is the mucus. Okay, and then now the last one, intrinsic factor. From the parietal cells. And it's required for B12 absorption. Okay, so take a second and you really want to study, those are the secretions of the small intestines. Let's make a line through that. There we go. And there's a couple multiple choice questions from that. So make sure that you know those. So take a second and look at all that, especially what we've written in. Okay, so there we talked about the table. This will be the rugae, the lining, the wrinkles, the folds of the stomach. There's basically what I just wrote in a table, but I like my table. Sometimes I think it helps if I go over it. Okay, regulations. How do those gastric juices know when to come out, when to be released? So, gastric juice is produced consistently, continuously. The rate of production varies under what you're eating, right? So, if you're eating things high in fat, you may need more lipase or things like that, and is under neural and hormonal control. So, somatostatin is the first one. That's a hormone, and it stops the hydrochloric acid. So somatostatin would stop the hydrochloric acid. Remember, hydrochloric acid is what helps the pepsinogen become pepsin to break down proteins. Okay, gastrin is a hormone that increases everything, increases the gastric juices. And then cholecystokinin, better known as CCK, released from the small intestines. When proteins and fat enter the small intestines, it decreases the gastric motility. So, hey, we got the food in the small intestines, take a break. And we'll learn later that cholecystokinin, it stimulates the bile to be released from the gallbladder. Okay, so there's a picture kind of the regulations. Okay, what is this? We said it absorbs little. What does it absorb? It absorbs some water, not much, some salts, some lipid-soluble drugs, and that part is important. So some drugs that we take are absorbed into the stomach, and then alcohol. So that's what's absorbed in. Shake, 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 shake and bake. That's your mixing movement. You do want to know, maybe highlight, maybe write in, whatever. You have to write it in because you can't highlight it. The pyloric sphincter, right here, the pyloric sphincter, which is right here at the bottom, right, pyloric sphincter is the opening from the stomach to the small intestines. So pyloric sphincter relaxes and allows chyme to enter the duodenum. So pyloric sphincter relaxes and allows that liquidy food, acidic liquidy food at that, to enter the duodenum or duodenum, pronounced either way. Let's talk about what that is for a second. Okay, the duodenum or the duodenum, that's the first part of the small intestines, which we're about to get into. Right here, it's going to go on down. And so that's the very first part, pronounced duodenum or duodenum, either one. So the pyloric sphincter is what allows it to open up in there. The clinical application was heartburn after the stomach. So we've probably all had heartburn. So stomach results from stomach ache from eating too much too quickly. Sometimes we eat so much because we're so hungry, but it takes about 20 minutes for our brain to know, hey, you're full. Stop eating. So sometimes we eat too much. The stomach contents in the esophagus cause inflammation. So it's like the burning in the esophagus. So it feels like it's kind of burning, heartburn. And then I do want to point out gastralgia is stomach pain. So highlight that word. Definitely want to know stomach pain. Okay, the pancreas. We already know the pancreas in the endocrine system, the first lecture with insulin and glucagon, but now we're going to figure out what it does for the digestive system. And it's really important. It does a lot. So the pancreas is a versatile organ, endocrine, insulin, and glucagon, but also it helps with the digestive system. So it's going to secrete pancreatic juices right into the small intestines. Okay, pancreatic duct, along with the common bile duct from the liver and gallbladder, empties into that duodenum of the small intestine. So the pancreas kind of dumps into the small intestines. The pancreatic duct and the common bile duct join together at an opening. Anytime you see the word ampulla, you want to know that means opening. At the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Hepto, liver, pancreatic, pancreas, opening. And then the hepatopancreatic sphincter, that's what allows it to open. So it controls the movement, open, close, open, close. Okay, so look right here. This is your pancreas, and the pancreas, highlight the last part. The pancreas has a large head and fits into the curvature of the duodenum. So the duodenum fits just around it. The tail of the pancreas lies against the spleen. But if you'll look in this picture very closely, you'll see right here. Okay, so this long piece right here, that's the pancreatic duct. Let's make that. Here we go. Pancreatic duct. So it goes all the way down the middle. But then the pancreatic duct goes in right here. And this is the gallbladder right here. So it meets, so the gallbladder and the pancreatic duct meet together right there at that opening. So maybe you can see how they go together. And then you zoom in, you can look at the other picture. And that's the hepatopancreatic ampulla, where they open up. And then the sphincter is the muscle around it that opens and closes. So the pancreas is going to put juices into the small intestines, and so is the gallbladder, which is attached to the liver. So they're both going to put stuff in. Now you want to know, for lab purposes, this is the head of the pancreas, and it fits into the duodenum. The pancreas is so important. What does it do? It releases all of this stuff. So it releases not salivary amylase, because it's not from saliva, but pancreatic amylase, which still breaks down carbs, splits starch and glycogen, those are carbs, into disaccharides. Pancreatic lipase breaks down lipids or fats. Trypsin, proteins. Chymotrypsin, proteins. Carboxypeptidase also digests proteins. Nuclease helps digest nucleic acids. Bicarbonate help make the pH, it says, make pancreatic juices more alkaline. Okay, let me kind of break this down for you. The first one you've got is, so what does the pancreas break down? It breaks down carbs. It breaks down fats. It breaks down 1, 2, 3. Those all do proteins. And it breaks down nucleic acids, which are DNA. Write that in. And it also regulates pH. So the pancreas releases an enzyme that breaks down carbs, releases an enzyme that breaks down fats, releases 3 enzymes that break down protein, trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase. Nuclease helps break down DNA, and then the bicarbonate ions. Okay, so there's 4 macromolecules that you eat. Unfortunately, we eat some other stuff we shouldn't, but there's 4 things that all living organisms have to have. We have to have carbs, we have to have protein, we have to have fats, and we have to have nucleic acids, or DNA. So if you look, the pancreatic juices, you've got the amylase that breaks down carbs, you've got the nuclease, which breaks down the DNA, you've got the lipase, which breaks down fat, and then you have trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase that break down protein. So the pancreas really helps with digesting all of these macromolecules, and those are 4 macromolecules. So those are your 4 major macromolecules. And that's all of them, but the pancreas helps break down them all. Okay, so there's a nice picture of it. You can see the pancreatic duct and all the pancreatic juices. Okay, the liver. Big, big, big. Largest internal organ. It's on the right side. Upper right side, just beneath the diaphragm. It's a reddish brown color, and if you come see the cadavers here, it's like a hard substance. So the stomach is like, you can push on it, it's mushy, but the liver is hard. Okay, it's got 4 lobes. The right lobe is the largest lobe. Oh, so highlight that. The right lobe is the largest lobe, and then you'll see. So this one is the right lobe. And then you got the left lobe, and then underneath it you can see this is the quadrate lobe, and I always remember it's right beside the gallbladder, so that kind of helps me remember that one. Kind of point these out for lab for you. And then the caudate lobe is right there. So there's 4 lobes: right, left, quadrate, and caudate. The caudate's down below the gallbladder, right where the inferior vena cava is. So you got 4 lobes of the liver. I'm going to ask you that on the test, how many lobes are there? And which one's the biggest? So, and look all that, make sure and learn all those for lab. One thing that I think is interesting, it's got these ligaments. So you'll see coronary ligament, all that. Ligaments attach the liver to the diaphragm. So it's like attached in place. It's not moving. Small intestines and large intestines are wiggling, kind of. But the liver is in place. Okay, what does the liver do? Whoa, it does a lot. So check out that for just a second. And I'm going to kind of break it down and explain it a little bit easier. But the liver always reminds me of, don't tell anybody that I said this, but the liver reminds me of a high school counselor. It's like, what does a high school counselor do? When you think of counselor, you think, I came from the high school setting. When you think of a counselor, you think they help diagnose learning disabilities. But most of the time, by the time a student gets to high school, they're diagnosed. They know what learning disabilities they have, and how to work with that, what to do. So like an elementary and middle school counselor, they really have to help with diagnosing and getting a plan in place, what that student needs to be successful. But a high school counselor, yeah, they do some of that. But I'm like, what do they do? If you ever talk to a high school counselor, they're like, they have the busiest job on the campus. They are so busy. And you're like, well, what do you do? Like, you don't teach a subject. So anyway, but if you talk to them, they help with testing. So they help like a little bit with, or they help a lot with giving the ACT. But that's only, once or a couple times a year. So they help with scheduling. But that's only at the beginning of the school year. They have to fix the schedules. They help send out transcripts in the summers. They help. So it's like they do a whole bunch of little stuff. They don't have like this one job like mine was teaching science. They have a whole bunch of little jobs. Not to mention they have to help the students that have problems. So they want to come and talk. So that'd be the counselor part of it. So they help with testing and scheduling and all that. It just, every year, the counselors are the busiest people, and you want to say, what do you do? Anyway, so they do a lot. The counselors do a whole lot in the school that people don't see. They're really busy, and that's kind of like the liver. It does a whole lot that we don't really see. It doesn't specifically, do this one thing. It does a whole bunch. But I want to point out this page for sure, but definitely the next part talks about the 5 main functions. So what are the things that are the most important? Oh, there's more than 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so it breaks down carbs. Okay, let me explain that. So let's say you eat a piece of, I'm on this one right here. Let's say you eat a piece of strawberry cake, and you only need so much energy from that cake. So the rest of that cake is going to be broken down, and then it's going to be stored. So it says it polymerizes. It takes the glucose that you worked hard to break down into glucose, and it stores it in the form of glycogen. So it's got all these, glycogen is a carbohydrate. So the sugars that we broke down, those sugar enters the blood, and then the sugar goes into the liver to be stored. If you don't store it, you use it for energy, like for muscles, for moving, flexing muscles. It also so whenever your blood sugar gets low, it can break down that carbohydrate glycogen and release it as glucose. So it helps with blood sugar. So it stores glucose in the form of glycogen, but when it's time, it'll break down that glycogen and release glucose. Okay, also, this really is no good. Ugh. Everything you eat that's not a sugar, it can convert it into sugars. So, let's say you eat excess of something else, it can make that become sugar. Okay, it says it oxidizes fat. It makes lipoproteins, phospholipids, and cholesterol. Cholesterol is a fat. Converts excess protein portions of carbohydrates into fat. So it can kind of take your fat and make your carbohydrates into fat, or vice versa. So it can kind of switch it up depending on what you need. Okay, protein. So we got that one. Protein metabolism. It breaks down the protein. Helps to form urea, which is in your urine. Synthesizes plasma proteins, converts certain amino acids into other amino acids. So it can change everything up. Stores glycogen. Stores these vitamins, A, D, B12, iron. Okay, this is a big one. I think this is important. It filters blood. So it's what filters the alcohol out of your blood. That'd be detoxification. But it also filters red blood cells. Remember that I told you red blood cells, they have a short lifespan. They go to the spleen and the liver to die. So the liver filters blood, and it's going to catch those dead red blood cells, or the old red blood cells. So this, like, the spleen and the liver are the cemeteries for red blood cells. It removes toxins, but it also, why do we care for digestion? It makes bile. So it actually makes the bile. So it says produces and secretes bile. Okay, next slide. The liver regeneration. The liver is the neatest thing. It is required. You can't live without it. So some organs you can live without. Can't live without the liver. Capable of regenerating itself. So if it's scarred, it can help regenerate. If cancer spreads to the liver, life can continue only weeks. But you can get a partial liver transplant, which is interesting. So anyway, that's all parts of replacing the liver. Okay, what is bile? So we said the liver makes bile. The liver makes bile. Bile is a yellowish green liquid. It's got water. It's produced from fat, so it's like a fatty substance, but it helps to break down fat. So what does it do? What is it made of? Water and salt. What does it do? Break down fats. Where does it come from? It's made in the liver, stored in the gallbladder. Okay. So the bile salts, they break down the fats, and they actually are recycled. There's 2 pigments, bilirubin and biliverdin. I don't know why, but those sound like little old men names to me. derived from hemoglobin, so that's what gives you the pigment. If you have hepatitis, you may have like a yellowish tint to you, and it's because of those pigments. It's also got cholesterol and electrolytes, so that's what it's made of. Okay, hepatitis is a virus. Let's see, does it say the word virus somewhere? So hepatitis, inflammation of the liver, probably caused by a virus. Many types. There's different types of it. Most common cause, oh, there we go, my bad. I knew it was somewhere. Most common cause is by a virus. Some people have symptoms and some do not. My father had hepatitis and he did not have very many symptoms. Some forms are bloodborne. My dad had hepatitis C, so it is bloodborne. Hepatitis C, it says at the bottom, accounts for about half of all known hepatitis cases. But we have a vaccine for Hep B. So we won't ever get Hep B because we're vaccinated. Okay, jaundice is that yellowish coloring. 3 kinds of jaundice I want you to look at. 1, 2, 3. Highlight all 3 of them because you might see them on the test. Obstructive jaundice would be where there's a blockage. Maybe a gallstone or a tumor. So it just is going to give you that yellowish tint. Hepatocellular jaundice would be a liver disease, probably from hepatitis. Hemolytic jaundice, red blood cells are destroyed too rapidly or improper blood fusions. And some people are born with infantile jaundice, but with the little baby Tanabed, they can get rid of that, right? Okay, so what's the gallbladder do? The gallbladder it says a pear-shaped sac, but what it does is it stores the bile. So maybe write it in somewhere. The liver makes the bile, but the gallbladder stores it. Okay, cystic duct is from the gallbladder, so you can look at the picture. You can see there's your cystic duct right there. Cystic duct from the gallbladder joins with the common hepatic duct, and then it's going to empty into the hepatopancreatic ampulla into the small intestines, right there at the duodenum, just like the pancreas. So they kind of partner up together with that. Okay, gallstones. You've probably heard of people who've had gallstones. Gallbladder normally concentrates bile salts, bile pigments, and cholesterol. Sometimes cholesterol precipitates and forms a solid crystal. So that's what these salts are. If they get big, they're gallstones. So bile salts, bile pigments, and cholesterol can make these solid stones. Why? Because of excess bile concentration to a diet high in fat. So if you have a diet high in fat, you make and release more bile because bile helps to emulsify fat, right? Break down fat. And so if you eat a diet high in fat, you make more bile. Well, sometimes the bile will harden and crystallize. So it says excess bile concentration or too much fat, cholesterol, bacon grease from the liver, so it can cause gallstones, which I've heard are very painful. Okay, why is the bile released? Okay, so we're going to write on this slide. Go ahead and highlight that first part. So it says the hormone CCK or cholecystokinin causes the gallbladder to contract when you eat too much fat in response to fats. Okay, so write this in. Let me make that real clear so you can get, if you were to see it as a question. Fatty chyme enters from the stomach and enters into the small intestines. And stimulates the CCK stimulates the gallbladder. D-E-R. To release bile. Okay, so fatty chyme enters the duodenum, which is that curve in the small intestines, and stimulates the hormone cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin stimulates the gallbladder to release bile. So in other words, when you eat a diet high in fat, you make CCK, and CCK tells the gallbladder to release bile. The function of the bile is to emulsify those fats. Okay, this table is nice, laid out for you. These are the hormones of the digestive tract. So I'm going to write it in. There's 3 that you really want to know. Okay, the first one is gastrin. And there's different kinds of gastrin, but I'm kind of breaking this down for you. The second one, secretin. And the third one, cholecystokinin. So those are your 3 hormones. And if you look at the table, you got gastrin. You got somatostatin, I added that on the bottom. Somatostatin, the CCK, and then your secretin. So those are your 4. Just kind of summed it up a little bit for you. Okay, gastrin specifically from the stomach, so gastric cells, and from small intestines. So from stomach, I'm not going to write all that in. Okay, so it comes from the stomach and from the small intestines. Now, what does it do? It stimulates those gastric juices. So it tells the stomach to get busy. So it increases secretory activity of gastric glands from stomach and small intestines. Okay, secretin comes from the small intestines. From the small intestines, what does it do? It stimulates the gallbladder. Let's say stimulates the pancreas with a high bicarbonate concentration. It also stimulates the gallbladder. No, it doesn't. Just the pancreas. Sorry. So secretin from the small intestines stimulates the pancreas. So we got that one. Okay, CCK. From the small intestines, so from the small intestines, and I have written in that it stimulates the gallbladder to release bile. So decreases secretory activity of gastric glands and inhibits gastric motility. It also stimulates the pancreas to release fluids, and it also does the gallbladder. So let's just say, to make it easy, it stimulates the pancreas and the gallbladder. So CCK is the pancreas and the gallbladder and the stomach. So that'd be gastric glands, the stomach. Okay, somatostatin comes from the stomach and stops secretion of acid, hydrochloric acid, by the parietal cell. So that's the 4 that kind of control everything. So 4 hormones: gastrin from the stomach and small intestines, secretin from the small intestines, helps with the pancreas, CCK from the small intestines does stomach, pancreas, and the gallbladder. Somatostatin stimulates the pancreas. Okay, next slide. What do the bile salts do? They break down fat. I feel like we already did this one. Bile salts aid in digestive enzymes through the emulsification. They're recycled, and they help absorb those vitamins. Bile salts also enhance absorption of fatty acids and cholesterol chylomicrons. Okay, so fatty acids form chylomicrons. So highlight that. And those are absorbed in the small intestines by those lacteals, which are in the villi, part of the lymphatic system. So bile salts enhance absorption of fat. So the fat forms chylomicrons, which are absorbed by the lacteals. So I'm going to ask you that on the test, so make sure you got that. So this is just about problems with the gallbladder. So symptoms would be pain in the right upper quadrant. So remember, it's on the right side. There's different tests they can do. Gallstones can be found in the gallbladder. We already talked about gallstones. Cystic duct, the hepatic duct, or the common bile duct may be blocked. Treatments, you can have it removed. That's a cholecystectomy. An endoscopy is to see it. But highlight for me cholecystitis. That's going to be inflammation or pain. Cholecystitis, inflammation of the gallbladder. Alright, moving to the small intestines. If I had one word for the small intestines, I would say it's absorb. So this is what really absorbs. So you're going to take the food from the small intestines that's, got a increased pH because of the pancreas and all of that, and you're going to absorb it into the bloodstream. So then what's left over does go into the large intestines, but it's going to be where absorption takes place. Different parts, you already talked about the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. So let's look at those pictures real quick. So you'll see there's the duodenum, the first part, and then all right in here is the jejunum, and then the very end is the ileum. Different from the bone. I don't know why they have the same name. So there are three parts to the small intestines: duodenum, jejunum, ileum. Okay, now go back to that last slide. Duodenum is the shortest part. Remember, the pancreas sits right into it. It's a curved part. The jejunum is the long, active part that we think about as the small intestines. And then the ileum is right before it goes into the large intestines. The jejunum and ileum are suspended by a double layer of the peritoneum called mesentery. Now, mesentery, it's like if you were to look at it, there we go. It's like a spiderwebby tissue. So it's not real thick, it's thin. A spiderwebby tissue that kind of holds it together, which transports blood and lymphatic vessels and nerves to the wall of the intestines. Okay, on the outside of the small intestines is like an apron. It looks fatty, but it's called the greater omentum. It drapes from the stomach over the small and large intestines and folds of the small intestines. Okay, so, but what did this, I think there's a picture of it right here. There it is, folded over, kind of laying there. But it looks like fat, but really it's got lymphatic cells in it. It's very, very, very important. It helps stop infection. So if you were to have an infection in the peritoneal cavity, in the abdominal cavity, the greater omentum it says high in lymphatic. It's got all these lymph nodes in it, and it helps stop infection. So like if there were cancer there, it would help prevent the spread. So it is very important. It just looks like gross fat. Okay, the small intestines has these villi in them. We already looked at them at the first of the PowerPoint. But it's got these villi, and the villi have, and the villi have in them the lacteals. We know that helps absorb fat. We've said it several times, it feels like. Okay, on the villi there are microvilli. And so if you were to look at it, it's like there's the villi, and then on the villi, we'll make it red, there's little bitty microvilli of the small intestines. Now, what does it do? This is going to increase surface area. And so, if you had a food particle, y'all like my microvilli, don't you? Okay. If you had a food particle, so let's say that the green is food, the food particles will be absorbed down in there, and so it helps that it's like there's more room for absorption, and so then it can go into the bloodstream. So there's a nice picture of it. I know mine was better. So the villi, now remember that the goblet cells, which are right here, produce mucus. There's a picture of it. The stomach, the duodenum connecting. Then you'll see the rest of the small intestines, the jejunum and the ileum. So you can kind of see it all there. Oh, we'll point out right here, look at this cadaver picture, or the cartoon-like picture, either way. This right here, All that yellow tissue, that's the mesentery. And then the greater omentum would be all on top of it. So mesentery connects the jejunum and the ileum, while greater omentum drapes over the front. But they kind of are the same substance, just different a little bit in location. Okay, so what does the small intestines secrete? Well, it's got this mucus, slimy substance. So in addition to mucus-secreting goblet cells, there's many specialized mucus-secreting glands. So there's lots of mucus in the small intestine so that it can slime through. Intestinal glands also secrete a watery fluid to help with the flow that picks up digestion products and transports them into the villi, so it kind of helps them be liquidy. Okay, and then there's enzymes. Peptidase breaks down proteins. Those sucrase, maltase, lactase break down the sugars, sucrose, maltose, and lactose. So it breaks them down into monosaccharides, which are really simple. So a disaccharide is two monosaccharides put together. So it breaks it down into the simplest form. And then there's lipase, which breaks down the fatty acids. So that's what the small intestine secretes. And this table here will help kind of to see that better. This is a summary of all the digestive enzymes. This table is really helpful, I think, kind of summarizing everything, making it look nice and simple. So take a second and look at that. Okay, this table shows you how. So how is it circulated in? So you can see right here, so it talks about the sugars, facilitate diffusion. They go in by facilitated diffusion, and you'll remember this maybe from a previous biology course. Okay, let me just go over the words. Osmosis is the movement of water into a cell or whatever, into the small intestines, and it doesn't require any energy. Okay, diffusion is the same thing, except it's not water. It's diffusion, the movement of anything, particles, but no energy is required. And they both go from high concentration to low concentration. So the flow, a lot of water in the small intestines is going to diffuse into the bloodstream. Okay, and then there's also facilitated diffusion, which is where it flows from the small intestines into the blood, but it has to go through a special protein channel. A facilitator has to have a helper. So there's osmosis, the movement of water. It just kind of flows through the cell membrane. Diffusion, same thing, but not water. And then facilitated diffusion means it has a special opening, a special protein door. But no energy is required. Now, active transport, which is different. That's all passive transport. Active transport requires energy. Okay, so now let's look at this. I'll erase all that. Okay, so the sugars is being transported, facilitated and active transport. The proteins are just active transport. Proteins are bigger, so they got to go through with energy. Fatty acids and glycerol, so it tells diffusion of fatty acids into cells. So diffusion. We highlighted this on another slide. Most fatty acids are resynthesized into fats and incorporated into the chylomicrons and then absorbed by the lacteals. Okay, here's what I want you to highlight. Electrolytes are active transport and water is osmosis. So electrolytes are diffusion and active transport. Water is osmosis. Okay, how? Peristalsis, that's squishing of the toothpaste. Squishy, squishy, squishy. And then there's segmentation. There's little muscles that are ring-like contractions. Just interesting, not necessarily I'm going to ask it on the test, but if the small intestines becomes distended, so blocked or irritated, a strong squish peristalsis may rush into the large intestines, and that's what causes the diarrhea. So the large intestines, we're going to learn, that's where the majority of the water is absorbed. And if it doesn't have an opportunity to go, the feces doesn't have an opportunity to go through the large intestines nice and slow and absorb all the water, if there's a rush, you're going to poop it all out in diarrhea. Celiac disease is where you can't digest gluten. I'm sure you probably know someone who has celiac disease. It's where the microvilli damages or destroyed. Diarrhea, weight loss, weakening. I'd say, lots and lots and lots of abdominal pain when they eat anything with gluten in them. So at the grocery store, you'll notice now there's gluten-free everything. They even have gluten-free bread, which is crazy. Okay, diverticulosis. I said crazy, but good if you have celiac disease because you can eat bread. But the fact that there's bread without gluten. Okay, diverticulosis. Okay, that's where think about in the small intestines, there's all those little villi, and they become infected. So outward pouches from the small intestines, from weakened intestinal walls. Diverticulitis is the inflammation. Symptoms, it hurts, pain, causes lack of fiber. And so pain in the abdominal. So those little bitty appendixes get infected, and they may burst and leak into the abdominal wall. Okay, the large intestines, if I had one word for the large intestines, it's going to be water. It is what absorbs the water. Now, the small intestines does do some water, but the large intestines reabsorbs, and recycles the majority of the water. And so it does also, I would like to say, it forms your feces. It's what excretes and forms the feces. Okay, here's the pieces. You got the cecum, which is the beginning. The colon, it goes ascending, transverse, descending. I'm going to show you a picture. Rectum is the end, and then the anus is the very last part, the opening. Okay, let's look at this picture. You've got here the cecum. This is all on the lab test, so pay attention. Cecum, and then this whole part right here is the colon, and we'll make it, how about that purple color? Ascending, transverse, descending. Let me do it again. Ascending up, transverse over, descending down. So that's the colon. Ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon. Okay, the sigmoid colon we'll do in, I'm not an orange fan, whatever. Right here. No, the orange doesn't show up. Sigmoid colon here. And sigmoid colon is kind of in the shape of an S. So you can remember sigmoid S. And then you've got the rectum. And then the anus, which is the opening. Okay, so you've got, let's go over it all again. Cecum. Ascending colon. Transverse colon. Descending colon. Sigmoid colon. Rectum. Anus. Okay, anytime you see the word flexure, it means a turn. So this over here is the splenic flexure. That's how I learned it, was splenic flexure. And on the other side is the hepatic flexure. So you'll know those turns. You want to know all of that. Now, we haven't mentioned, so I do want to point out the appendix right there, little bitty pinky-like structure where the small intestines and large intestines meet. So right there, that's where the small intestines meets. Right there. The appendix, it doesn't have any digestive function to it. And there's lots of theories about what the functions could be, but we do know it has lymphatic tissue in it. So it's got some, it may help with the lymphatic system, the immune system. Okay, there's the structure of the large intestines up close. What does the large intestines do? We said it absorbs water, right? It has little digestive function. It contains glands, so it's got mucus from goblet cells, secretes mucus. The only significant secretion of the large intestine, so there's not like a whole bunch of enzymes, aren't you glad? It does absorb water. houses, that's why the feces sometimes is dry, because all the water's gone into the bloodstream. It houses intestinal bacteria. So microflora, that's the good bacteria that helps you break down cellulose. Cellulose is fiber. Cellulose is insoluble fiber, which is in bread. Metamucil helps you go to the bathroom and produces vitamin K and B12, and then it also forms the feces. So it's where the feces is made, pooping out, right? Movement through is going to be slow. Aren't you glad you don't have to go to the bathroom that much, or as often every time you eat? Some people do, but every time you eat, peristalsis is slower. Movement of the large intestines are similar of the small intestines, but less frequent. Mixing and peristalsis, maybe 2 to 3 times a day. Not me. Peristaltic waves produce strong mass movements, which usually follow meals. The defecation reflex, that's the reflex that relax the internal and anal sphincter. Okay, what is feces made of? It's got some water, give or take, depending on your hydration levels. Electrolytes, which would be salt, sodium, and potassium. Mucus, bacteria. It's got dead cells, too. Bile pigments, which produce the color. The bacteria is what make the smell. All right. Some disorders of the large intestines. We already talked about diverticulosis. Inflammatory bowel disease, so you may have ulceritis or Crohn's disease. I know people with Crohn's disease that it can cause lots of problems later on in life. It's more serious, affects all the layers, occurs in both small and large intestines. And then colorectal cancer, you can actually go and get a colonoscopy. I think after, you have to check me on this, but I think it's after age 50, you're supposed to get a colonoscopy. I'm not 50 yet. 4th most common cancer in the U.S. So a colonoscopy is where they take a light or camera up into the anus and look in the large intestines, and they're looking for polyps, little projections that could become cancer. So that's colorectal cancer. And then as you get older, this is what happens. Tooth breakdown, gums recede. My dentist always tells me that I brush too hard. My gums are sagging. Teeth may loosen. GI tract becomes less efficient. The peristalsis, you can't eat as much because it doesn't move through as fast, slowing peristalsis. Perhaps increased heartburn. Gastric secretion slows. Constipation. This sounds great, doesn't it? Aren't you excited about getting old? Nutrient absorption decreases, so you're not getting as much nutrients even though you're eating the same. Incidence of lactose intolerance, so milk may hurt your belly more. Accessory organs age, but typically not necessarily in ways that affect health. All right, well, I hope that was helpful.